So one of the first things I want to show you is these pieces of recycled paper. You look at it in terms of a value scale, the value of recycled paper is usually a mid-tone, somewhere between 5 and 4 on this grayscale. And that's really great because when you're working with opaque media, you always want to work, or it really is helpful to work from medium values to dark to light. When you work on a brown piece of paper, this craft paper, you already have your medium value down. So if you were going to add a medium value on top of it, you know exactly what the medium value would look like. And we're going to do a texture exercise. So the first thing I want to do is I want to load up my brush with a pigment that I know is opaque. And if you look at your color chart, you'll know right away that red ochre, ultramarine blue, yellow earth, sometimes burnt umber are very opaque. We're going to choose the ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue is one of my favorite pigments of all time. So the first thing I'm going to do is put it on my palette. And this is the Himik gouache or the Arctic squash, and it is pretty much butter. What I want to do is actually dry it off. The way I'm going to do that is by just putting strokes on the paper until the paint is really dry. So, and then when I get it to be as dry as it can be, I'm going to make a mark. I'm going to add more paint to my palette. And I want you to notice just how the different drynesses have an effect on the edge. Now I'm going to add a little bit of water, just a tiny bit of water to my mixture. That was a little too much, so I'm going to add a little more pigment. And then a little bit more water. And now we're moving towards tea. You notice how the paint is actually drying to a different color as it gets more and more dry. So you'll notice that this color is lighter than this color. This color is still wet. It's always good to start with your lightest color and go to your darker color. Now, when you're starting to add blue to this lighter color, you want to add it very carefully. Okay, we're using ultramarine blue. So I put just a tiny amount of ultramarine blue in there, and I'm trying to mix it really well and mix that yellow into the blue so that it's really well mixed. We're going to mix from white to another color. So let's get some white on our palette. So that's our white. So start with white. Now we're going to add another color to the mix. And again, just doing it very carefully. I'm going to go with purple because I know the purple or violet is it purple? No, violet. It's pretty opaque. So these are two very opaque colors. I'm going to add a little violet. Just a little more violet. You notice what happens when you start to add a color on top of the gouache. This is gouache. The paint starts to lift up, the blue paint, and pollutes the white paint. So the longer I mix it like this, touch it, it's going to mix with the paint below it. If you don't want it to blend, you have to train yourself to limit your brush strokes. You also can experiment with dry brush marks. Dry paint gives a nice texture, and a round brush can do this kind of mark. The more water in the brush, the larger the mark is going to be. It's going to spread out. So let me do very liquid. I'm going to dry it out by just dabbing it on the paper. Get a very skinny mark. I'm going to dab it more. Actually, we're going to do a triangle. So here's a nice little tip. You start to use crayons or colored pencils, and you can see which ones work really good over the gouache. You can see it. So this looks good on the paper. It looks great on the gouache. So I'm going to do a pyramid. This is a yellow, green. This is a yellow. You can do darker ones. This one's dark, but you can't even see it. So something to think about. And I have these. So we're going to do a little layered pyramid that's a gradient. And I'm going to gradient between white and rose. Oops, I'll do it. So I'm going to take my white first, mix it in a little puddle. Second stroke, I'm going to add a little bit of the rose. All right. All right, so we're going to do another overlap. We're going to take this rose and we're going to put it on another layer on top of this. And as long as you don't mix it, you make a lot of brush strokes, it's gonna sit on top. Now I want the next stroke to blend with this bottom layer. So I'm gonna actually dissolve some of that paint on the blue layer to make this pink a little bluer. Put rose with white, it turns cool. So what if I want to have the rose, but I want it to remain not pink, I want it to be rose. So closer to its original temperature. So the way I would do that, I would paint a layer white first, like this, and then I would overpaint the more transparent color, and not mix it. Let it stay as its separate. Its separate entity. That way the white and the pink are not mixing together, and it gives you a warmer temperature than when you add white. And that works with yellow as well. Yellow is a notoriously transparent color, very weak in terms of tinting power. Need a lot of yellow to make the yellow appear opaque on a brown piece of paper. Here I'm painting the yellow paint on a dry white layer. You can get the same effect with a lot less paint. Now, if you add white to yellow, it's going to turn cooler. I love about crayons is how you can use the side of them kind of lessen the contrast. Different kinds of marks. I'm going to use the red. This red in my palette is pretty transparent, so I have to see how it's going to react. So we'll just do some tests. You can get a lot of different textures and effects. I'm going to put here. So by underpainting that red, you're going to get a much brighter red. Do the yellow. Did this before. And I'm going to add a little bit of orange to my yellow. Hopefully not getting any blue in it. Got a warmer yellow. Okay, let's put a little white in that, wet white into that yellow, and you'll see how different that looks. So that's a much more cool yellow than that is. And that's because I mixed white with it. I want to use one of my long brushes. So this is that script brush, liner brush. This can hold a lot of paint. Make very, very delicate lines. Use a flat brush, and I'm going to load one side with one color and one side with another color. So I'm going to start with the blue on one side, and I'm going to start with, let's do this red.